Bill Clinton's Conspiracy, an examination of the evidence that Bill Clinton is a supporter of an international conspiracy out to control the world. My name is Ralph Epperson, and I will be the one presenting this material today. For the sake of any dated material on this presentation, it was recorded on April the 18th, 2009. First of all, let me say that this is a PowerPoint presentation and that this computer program will not allow me to speak while I am changing slides. It might sound a little disjointed, but that is just the way this program works. I want to thank you for watching this DVD, and I can almost guarantee you that if you are open and listen, this information will change the way you look at history and politics in not only America, but in the world. So let me tell you in one sentence what I will be exploring during this presentation. There is a conspiracy at work in the United States and the world itself, and Bill Clinton is a supporter of it. I think a good place to start would be to discuss a little of my personal background and why I wanted to offer you this information. I am a graduate of the University of Arizona, and I thought that meant that I had been educated. I joined the Young Republicans when I moved to Los Angeles after I graduated and was told by another young college graduate that I needed to read what he called revisionist history, the theory that history as we had been taught in our public schools needed to be revised. I had to admit that I didn't know what that meant, and he suggested that I start reading, and I did as he suggested. As I read, I was being exposed to a competing school of thought other than the one I had been exposed to in my public schools. And for the first time in my life, I started to question what I had been taught. And what I had been taught is what I now call the accidental view of history. This view holds that no one knows why wars, revolutions, and depressions start. They just do. This is certainly the view that the majority of historians favor and is taught around the United States as the official story of our past. But I started seeing the evidence that the major events of our past have been intentionally caused, and I had to learn the definition of a new word. And that word was conspiracy, and it might be appropriate at this time to define it. Webster's defines the word as two or more people meeting in secret with an evil purpose. Notice that these people must meet in secret because their plans are evil, because their goals would not be accepted by the people if they were told what they were. People with good motives seek publicity, not secrecy. So what I was learning was that there was an alternative explanation to the history of the world. And that other explanation is what I call the conspiratorial view of history. And it holds that the events of the past have been planned years in advance by a central worldwide conspiracy. So it is the task of those like myself who have found the evidence of what kind of future they have in store for us to make it public, and that is what I've dedicated my life to for over 40 years. So I publish materials that will hopefully inform those who want to know why great events occur. I have written 4 books and 11 booklets on individual subjects of interest and produced a total of 5 DVDs. This is my first book, and it is intended to provide the evidence that a conspiracy has been planning the major events of this nation years in advance. It is called The Unseen Hand, and I have subtitled it An Introduction to the conspiratorial view of history. One of the great evidences that I am right comes from a very unlikely source, but one who should be recognized by all but a few, and that individual is former President Bill Clinton. Because Bill Clinton told America on a live national broadcast that there was a conspiracy and that he had been elected president because he was a supporter of it. And to start that discussion, I would like to show you a book that the former President and Vice President Al Gore wrote in 1992 entitled Putting People First. And on page 217 of this book, Bill Clinton provided us with a transcript of his acceptance speech he delivered on the night of July the 16th, 1992, when he accepted the nomination as President of the United States. And on page 231, this is what he said. As a teenager, I heard John Kennedy's summons to citizenship. And then, as a student at Georgetown University, I heard that call clarified by a professor I had named Carol Quigley. We now have to go back a few years to the summer of 1963 when Bill Clinton was selected to participate in a thing called Boys Nation, held each year in Washington, D.C. to expose some of next year's senior high school students to life in the political arena. This is a picture of young Bill Clinton shaking the hand of President John Kennedy in the Rose Garden of the White House when they met during that conference. This picture had to be taken during the summer of 1963 because, as you know, President Kennedy was assassinated in November of that year. As you will recall, Bill Clinton was elected President of the United States in 1992, and to acknowledge his defeat of President George Bush, Time magazine named Bill Clinton Man of the Year of 1993. By the way, please notice what they did when they placed Bill Clinton's picture in front of the M letter in the word Time. They strategically placed his portrait directly in front of the letter M, making the two upward points of that letter appear as if the president had horns. Were they trying to tell us something? But in truth, Time magazine should have named these two men as Men of the Year, President John Kennedy and Professor Carol Quigley, the two men who made Bill Clinton President of the United States. Just so you know, I want to apologize to Time magazine. I took one of their covers and cut out its picture and made this cover myself. I don't want to get sued by them for claiming that they made a cover when they didn't. Let me now discuss how these two men made Bill Clinton President of the United States. Bill graduated from high school in 1964, and he went to Georgetown University near Washington, D.C., and graduated in 1968. Let me show you some of what Dr. Quigley taught young Bill Clinton while he was at Georgetown. Dr. Quigley wrote the book entitled Tragedy and Hope in 1966 when Bill Clinton was a student there. Notice that it was published in about the middle of Mr. Clinton's 4 years there. Bill Clinton attended Georgetown between the years 1964 and 1968, and Tragedy and Hope was published in 1966. This is a photocopy of the Georgetown Alumnus magazine for the winter of 1993, meaning 25 years after Bill Clinton graduated. It says that Tragedy and Hope was required reading for Quigley's course. And since Professor Quigley was the head of the department that Bill Clinton majored in, that means that Bill Clinton read this book while he was at Georgetown, and we can now read what Bill read. The inside desk cover of the book says that Dr. Quigley was the professor of history at the Foreign Service School at Georgetown University, and that he formerly taught at Princeton and Harvard. He received his PhD from Harvard as well. Let's now see what Dr. Quigley taught young Bill Clinton. This is taken from page 950 of Tragedy and Hope. There does exist and has existed for a generation, meaning back to around 1920, an international Anglophile network which operates. By the way, the word Anglophile means that this network was primarily English, but notice that Dr. Quigley says it is also international, meaning that foreigners could join as well. So this network operated to some extent in the way the radical right, and by the way, that means people like me who research their activities, believes the Communist Act. In fact, this network has no aversion to cooperating with the communists or any other group, and frequently does so. I know of the operations of this network because I studied it for 20 years, meaning back to just after World War II, and was permitted for 2 years in the early 1960s to examine its papers and secret records. And now listen to this incredible confession. Dr. Quigley said, "I have no aversion to it or most of its instruments. But in general, my chief difference of opinion is that it wishes to remain unknown. And I believe its role in history is significant enough to be known." This is an absolutely staggering statement. And to understand why, I have to go back to World War I. This war was fought between the years of 1914 and 1918. And the plan was to involve a lot of nations in the wars, to convince the people of the world that nations cause wars, and that a world government should be created that would ultimately abolish national sovereignty. This war murdered 16 million people. That's 16 million people. 16 million. The picture in the background is of a World War I cemetery in France. The League of Nations was created for that purpose, but the Senate of the United States refused to ratify the treaty. So in 1920, the Council on Foreign Relations was created to slowly convince the American people that we needed a world government to ultimately abolish nationalism. In other words, if we did not have nations, we would not have wars. And to accomplish that goal, this conspiracy planned World War II, which started in 1941, but was planned as early as 1920. Once again, the plan was to involve many nations, to further convince the people of the world that nations cause wars. And if we didn't have nations, we wouldn't have wars. And this war murdered 53 million people. 53 million people. 53 million. The picture in the background is of a World War II cemetery in France, where 14,000 American soldiers are buried. That's 14,000 American soldiers, 14,000. All because this network had a goal for the world to create the United Nations, to ultimately create a world government, to abolish national sovereignty, and Dr. Quigley has no aversion to what this conspiracy did. And notice that if Bill Clinton did not rebuke the views of Dr. Quigley during his acceptance speech, as he did not, that means that Bill Clinton also has no aversion to the murder of 53 million people to give the world the United Nations. That shows you just how evil this conspiracy is. And this quote comes from page 324 of Tragedy and Hope. The powers of financial capitalism had another far-reaching aim, nothing less than to create a world system of financial control in private hands, able to dominate the political system of each country and the economy of the world as a whole. This system was to be controlled by the central banks of the world, and just so you know, America has a central bank. It is called the Federal Reserve, but it is not federal, it's privately owned. So these central banks act in concert by secret agreements arrived at in frequent meetings and conferences. Notice here that this network arranged for the meetings of these banks to be in secret so that the public would not know what their plans were. It now becomes appropriate to introduce you to Cecil Rhodes, one of the many people that Dr. Quigley identified as being one of these conspirators. Quigley says Mr. Rhodes feverishly exploited the diamond and gold fields of South Africa and rose to be Prime Minister of Cape Colony from 1890 to 1896. In fact, the African nation of Rhodesia was named after Cecil Rhodes. That nation is now called Zimbabwe. Dr. Quigley continues, in the middle 1890s, Rhodes had a personal income of $5 million, which was spent freely for his mysterious purposes. These purposes centered on his desire to bring all the habitable portions of the world under their control. For this purpose, Rhodes left part of his great fortune to found the Rhodes Scholarships at Oxford. It was the intention of Mr. Rhodes to bring intelligent young people to Oxford to teach them of the existence of this network and then induce them to join in support of it. So where did young Bill Clinton go after graduation from Georgetown in 1968? This is page 36 of the U.S. News and World Report article for October the 19th, 1992. And it shows that from 1968 to 1970, Bill Clinton was at Oxford studying as a Rhodes Scholar. This is a picture of Mr. Clinton and Hillary taken in 1970, shortly after he returned from England after completing his studies at Oxford. You can see that Mr. Clinton was taught that his long hair and beard would be a way of showing his contempt for the traditional clean-shaven appearance of modern-day civilization. Even Hillary was caught up in this manner of showing contempt. Dr. Quigley then explained on page 582 what the Rhodes Scholarship Organization did in America. They set up a Council on Foreign Relations in New York. And then on page 950, Quigley taught Clinton the American branch of this organization has played a very significant role in the history of the United States. So in 1988, several years after he returned to America, Bill Clinton joined the Council on Foreign Relations. And then in 1992, the Council on Foreign Relations delivered the election to President Bill Clinton. Yes, Bill Clinton learned his lessons well. It seems reasonable to presume that Mr. Clinton would agree with this statement made in the biography of Cecil Rhodes written by Sarah Gertrude Millen. The government of the world was Rhodes' simple desire. And the Arizona Daily Star of March 6, 1993 acknowledged that President Clinton had learned his lessons well. It reported that Oxford had awarded him an honorary doctorate of civil law. You do a good job for the conspiracy, and they reward you. There is one more gentleman who was influential in the early career of Bill Clinton, and he might have been the one who truly set him on the course of becoming the future president of the United States. And that individual was Senator William Fulbright, the Democrat senator from Arkansas, the home state of Bill Clinton. When the senator died at the age of 89 in February of 1995, the Associated Press article that reported on the story stated that Bill Clinton worked as a clerk in Senator Fulbright's office while a student at Georgetown University. Clinton said, if it weren't for Fulbright, I don't think I'd be here today. And the senator could have been the one urging him early on in his life to go to Georgetown University, to become the student of Dr. Carroll Quigley, and then to attend Oxford on a Rhodes Scholarship, ultimately to join the Council on Foreign Relations. Because it is no coincidence that Senator Fulbright was both a Rhodes Scholar and a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. And the last quote from Tragedy and Hope I would like to bring to your attention is this one found on page 73. The business interests expected to control both political parties equally. So here Dr. Quigley taught Bill Clinton that both the Democrat and Republican parties were controlled by the same people. And we, the people, think we change things when we elect the candidates from one party as a way of protesting the record of the other party while in office. Dr. Quigley continued, indeed, some of them intended to contribute to both and allow an alternation of the two parties in public office. That means that these powerful men would allow the Democrats to be in office for 8 years, and then they would rig it so that the Republicans would be in office for 8 years. Pretty much as it has been since the 1920s when the Council on Foreign Relations was created. Now let me continue with Quigley's answer to the question, why do they want to alternate the party in power? Quigley continued, in order to conceal their own influence inhibit any exhibition of independence by politicians, and allow the electorate, that's us, to believe they, meaning us, were exercising their, meaning us, our own free choice. See, we dummies are too stupid to figure it out, so they get away with it. We think that we change things when we elect the other party after the first one had ruled for 8 years. And they continue to get away with it. And to show you that the statement that both parties are controlled by the same people is true, let me show you the evidence that President George Bush, the father, intentionally threw the election in 1992 to Bill Clinton. There is a universal rule in politics whether you are running for dog catcher of Tucson, as I did in 1996. This is, of course, one of my lawn signs when I ran in 1996 for dog catcher here in Tucson, where I live. I didn't win, but I don't think my campaign slogan of vote early and often had anything to do with my defeat. But to get back to my point, this rule applies to candidates from dog catcher to president. And that universal rule is never, never, never promise a tax increase. You can talk about increasing benefits or adding new bureaus, but you must never, never, never tell the electorate that you will increase taxes to pay for your new benefits or new bureaus. But you, as a successful candidate, know that you can make the promise while you are running and then raise taxes after you are elected, because the American people have a short memory. Now, to show you that George Bush knew the rule, during his presidency, he coined a very catchy phrase, "Read my lips, no new taxes." This was repeated so often that it became a joke amongst comedians, but the intent was to make it well known among the American people. So what happened next? George Bush raised taxes in 1990, 2 years before the election. And George Bush lost the election of 1992. Because George Bush was told to intentionally lose the election by the people who control both political parties. By the way, there was a precedent for Mr. Bush's rather dramatic action. Walter Mondale, the Democrat candidate for president in 1984 against Ronald Reagan, the Republican candidate, did the same thing. On the night of the Democrat National Convention, on July the 19th, 1984, when Mr. Mondale accepted the nomination for the presidency from the Democrat Party, Mr. Mondale broke the no taxes rule with these words. Let's tell the truth. My opponent will raise taxes, and so will I. He won't tell you. I just did. And to show you that the cartoonist had a field day with Mr. Mondale's statement, this cartoon appeared in U.S. News and World Report. Mondale is shown on his bandwagon under a banner which reads, "I'll raise your taxes." He is shown saying through a megaphone, "Come one, come all, jump on, folks. Hey, 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 everybody." And there is no one around jumping on his bandwagon. And the second cartoon shows Mondale holding up what appears to be a post-election Chicago Daily Tribune newspaper with the headline reading, "Mondale defeats Mondale," apparently referring to his Democrat convention speech in which he promised a tax increase. And as could be predicted by anyone who knew the rule, Mondale lost the election of 1984 intentionally. And yes, ladies and gentlemen, Walter Mondale was also a member of the Council on Foreign Relations. Notice that both the Republican and Democrat presidential candidate was asked to throw his election, and both of them did by breaking the no taxes rule. So this is evidence that both political parties are controlled by the same people. That means that the conspiracy wanted Bill Clinton in office. He had followed the yellow brick road, and a conspiracy made him president of the United States. Now let me point out that to Dr. Quigley's credit, he did experience a slight change of heart about his support of this conspiracy. 4 years after his death in 1977, Dr. Quigley's new book was published. It was entitled The Anglo-American Establishment. First of all, please notice that the flag of the United States shown on the dust cover of the book is upside down. This is a universal distress sign that a nation is in trouble. So the implication of the publishers is that the United States was in trouble, apparently because of this international network. And this is part of the evidence that Dr. Quigley had some reservations about what he discovered about the power of this network. This paragraph underneath his picture on the back cover of the book says these are the words of Professor Quigley before he passed away. No country that values its safety should allow what this network accomplished. That a small number of men would be able to wield such power in administration and politics should be given almost complete control over the publication of documents relating to their actions, should be able to exercise such influence over the avenues of information that create public opinion, and should be able to monopolize so completely the writing and the teaching of the history of their own period. Welcome aboard, Dr. Quigley. Dr. Quigley went on, "It is not easy for an outsider to write this history of a secret group of this kind, but it should be done. For this group is one of the most important historical facts of the 20th century. But agreeing with the group on goals, I cannot agree with them on methods. In this group were persons whose lives have been a disaster to our way of life. Unfortunately, their influence has been strong, and thus ends the story of Dr. Carroll Quigley. If Dr. Quigley was alive today and I could talk to him, I would say, if only you had said this before this international network you so strongly supported and had no aversion to, murdered 53 million people in World War II, they might still be alive today. But I must be fair to Dr. Quigley. At least he figured it out and tried to correct his early support of this international network. He deserves the praise of freedom-loving people all over the world. But his attempt to clear the air poses a real problem for Bill Clinton. He also said that he had no aversion to this conspiracy. And while Dr. Quigley finally objected to its evil methods of wars, depressions, and revolutions, during Clinton's entire 8-year administration, he did not renounce the methods of this network. In fact, he appointed hundreds of their members, fellow members of the Council on Foreign Relations, to positions inside his administration. I would now like to read a short list of his key appointments right after he became president in 1993. Each of these men and women were members of the Council on Foreign Relations, the organization created by the Rhodes Network. I will not indicate which position he appointed them to, but will just list their names. And as I read these names, please remember that President Clinton's hero, Dr. Quigley, said that these people had been a disaster to our way of life. Warren Christopher, Clifford R. Wharton, James Woolsey, Anthony Lake, Samuel Berger, Les Aspin, William J. Crow, Madeleine Albright, Lloyd Benson, Roger Altman, Donna Shalala, Alice Rivlin, Henry Cisneros, Laura Tyson, Bruce Babbitt. But Bill Clinton appointed them anyway, even after Dr. Quigley made the statement that they were a disaster to our way of life. And let me not forget to mention the name of one more individual who has been a disaster to our way of life. Bill Clinton. You will recall that Dr. Quigley wrote The Anglo-American Establishment in 1981, and Bill Clinton did not become president until 1993, obviously 12 years later. He certainly could have read this book just like he read Dr. Quigley's first book, Tragedy and Hope. And ever since he has been out of office, he has done nothing to expose this conspiracy. Bill Clinton was encouraged to learn about this conspiracy. Bill Clinton went to Georgetown to be taught about this conspiracy. Bill Clinton then went to Oxford to learn more about this conspiracy. Bill Clinton joined the Council on Foreign Relations to become a part of this conspiracy. And Bill Clinton was made President of the United States because he had no aversion to this conspiracy. And then Bill Clinton did nothing to expose it nor stop it in its plans for America. This is the legacy of Bill Clinton's presidency. Men of decent morality will always regret that he did not have the conviction to expose them and their evil deeds. Yes, this conspiracy has truly become Bill Clinton's conspiracy. Now, I would like to end with an answer to the question, what is it these conspirators want? And the best way I know how to answer that question is by quoting from this book by Alvin Toffler entitled The Third Wave. Mr. Toffler is described as being one of the world's best-known social thinkers. It also says that his books are read in more than 50 countries, which means that his ideas are being considered worldwide. This book was published in 1980, and as you can see by the line shown in the red rectangle, this book is the classic study of tomorrow. So if anyone wants to know what the world is being taught about the future that these conspirators want, this is the book to read. But let me make this clear. Mr. Toffler is in agreement with these changes while I am in total opposition. I would like to quote from this book because I consider his comments to be the easiest way to understand what our future is. These are his thoughts. The proverbial man in the street says the world has gone mad, while the expert points to all the trends leading towards catastrophe. This book offers a sharply different view. It contends that the world has not swerved into lunacy, and that beneath the seemingly senseless events, there lies a startling and potentially hopeful pattern. Many of today's changes are not independent of one another, nor are they random. For example, the global energy crisis may seem like an isolated event, but it is, in fact, a part of a much larger phenomenon: the death of industrialization and the rise of a new civilization. A new civilization is emerging in our lives, and blind men everywhere are trying to suppress it. Now here he is writing about me and the others like me, those in opposition. This new civilization brings with it new family styles, meaning single-parent families, homosexual and lesbian families raising children, etc.,